He stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. The house loomed over him, its windows like vacant, staring eyes. There was no sign of life, no light, no sound save for the dripping of water from the eaves. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet. He pushed the heavy oak door. It swung inward with a low, groaning complaint, revealing a cavernous, dust-choked foyer. Moonlight filtered through a grimy, arched window. High above, cast long, distorted shadows across the checkered marble floor. Furniture lay shrouded in white cloths, like ghostly forms in slumber. The air inside was cold and stagnant, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. A grand staircase swept upward into the oppressive darkness of the second floor. Daniel's footsteps echoed unnervingly as he moved deeper into the house, his phone's flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the gloom. He found himself in a vast drawing room. A layer of dust coated every surface, and cobwebs draped the corners like macabre decorations. His light swept across the walls, landing on a large oil-painted portrait above a cold, stone fireplace. It depicted a family, a stern-faced man, a woman with sad, hollow eyes, and a young boy standing between them. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. The boy had his face. Not just a resemblance, but an exact likeness. The semi-dark, unruly hair, the same deep-set eyes, the same small scar above his left eyebrow. It was him, but dressed in clothes from another era. A cold dread, sharp and icy, crept up his spine. Who were these people? Why was he in their portrait? The house seemed to hold its breath around him, the silence pressing in. He backed away from the painting, his mind reeling. He had no memory of this place, of these people. He was an orphan, raised in a city far from any valley, with no knowledge of his family. No. He ascended the grand staircase, each creaking step a protest against his intrusion. The thudding stopped as he reached the landing, plunging the house back into an unnerving quiet. A long, dark hallway stretched before him, lined with closed doors. His flashlight beam trembled, dancing across peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceilings. He felt eyes on him, a palpable sense of being watched from the shadows. He began to check the rooms. A dusty nursery with an empty rocking horse that swayed gently, as if recently vacated. A master bedroom where a woman's music box lay open on a vanity, its tune silenced. In each room, he found small, unsettling clues. A child's drawing of a stick-figure boy trapped behind the bars of a house. A diary filled with frantic, paranoid entries about a shadow that walked the halls. On a dusty mirror, scrawled in what looked like lipstick, were the words, "He never left." The messages were growing more personal, more direct. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The air grew colder, and a whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves, slithered at the edge of his hearing. It seemed to form a word, a name. His name. Daniel. He reached the end of the hall. Only one door remained. It was different from the others, made of dark, heavy wood, with no handle, only a tarnished brass keyhole. This was it. He could feel it, the source of the thudding, the whispers, the answers he both craved and feared. As he reached for the door, the whisper came again, louder this time, seeming to echo not in the hallway, but inside his own head. Daniel recoiled, his hand dropping to his side. The whisper was followed by a faint, childish giggle that seemed to come from all around him. A profound, unnatural cold enveloped him, seeping into his bones. He stood frozen, his mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Then, with a slow, deliberate click, the lock on the final door turned. The door swung open on its own, revealing not a room, but a wall of impenetrable, absolute darkness. A chilling void that seemed to pull at the light from his phone. And from deep within that blackness, the whisper solidified into a clear, intimate voice, speaking directly into his mind. "Welcome home, Daniel." Daniel stood frozen in the hallway. The door handle at the end of the corridor slowly, silently, stopped moving. Complete silence returned to the mansion, but a whisper still echoed in his mind. "Daniel, you finally came back." His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. "This isn't real," he muttered to himself. "Just an old house. Wind, pipes, animals." He was trying to convince himself, but deep down he knew something was terribly wrong. Daniel slowly backed away from that last door. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the hallway, like standing near an open freezer. He lifted his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. There were at least 10 other rooms, most of their doors slightly ajar. "Maybe someone is living here," he whispered. That thought didn't make him feel any better. He walked to the nearest door and pushed it open. The hinges shrieked in protest. Inside was a small bedroom, everything blanketed in a thick layer of dust. An old wooden bed, a cracked mirror, and children's toys scattered across the floor. Daniel crouched down and picked up a small wooden horse. The moment his fingers touched it creak, the bedroom door behind him slammed shut. Daniel jumped to his feet. "What?" He rushed to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty. But something had changed. The door at the very end of the hallway, the last door, was now slightly open. Daniel's stomach tightened. He was certain it had been closed just moments before. He stared at it. The darkness within that seemed deeper than normal shadows, like the room itself was swallowing the light. Then suddenly thud. Another loud noise echoed from somewhere downstairs. Daniel whipped his flashlight toward the staircase. "Hello?" he called again. No answer. For a fleeting moment, he considered leaving. Just get in his car and drive away. But the photograph in the package kept flashing in his mind, the one showing a much younger him, standing right outside this house. There was something here he needed to understand. So, Daniel went downstairs. The ground floor was even darker now. Rain had started to fall outside, and flashes of lightning illuminated the tall, grimy windows. He explored the rooms one by one. A library filled with moldy books. A dining room with a massive table. An old kitchen where rusty pots still hung from hooks. Everything looked abandoned for decades, but not completely empty. Because Daniel kept noticing things. Strange things that didn't make sense. In the dining room, one chair was pulled slightly away from the table, as if someone had just gotten up. In the kitchen, a teacup sat on the counter, and inside the cup, the tea looked fresh. Daniel touched it. Still warm. He snatched his hand back. "That's impossible. Who could have made tea here?" Then he heard it again. Not a thud. Not footsteps. Something else. Breathing. A slow, wet, labored breath, and it was coming from right behind him. Nothing. But the breathing continued, soft and ragged. He followed the sound into another hallway. At the end of it was a door with a small metal plate that read, "Basement." The breathing was coming from behind that door. Every instinct screamed at him not to open it, but his curiosity was stronger. He slowly turned the handle. The door opened with a long, drawn-out creak, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into absolute blackness. The breathing sound grew louder. Daniel pointed his flashlight down the steps. Dust motes danced in the beam. The air smelled damp and rotten. He began his descent, each step groaning under his weight. When he reached the bottom, he saw it. The basement walls were covered with hundreds of drawings, all done in black charcoal, and every single drawing showed the same thing. A tall, shadowy figure with long arms and no face, standing behind people, what seemed him. Beneath every drawing, the same message was scrolled. "IT lives behind the last door." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He stepped closer to one drawing that was different from the rest. It showed a small boy standing in front of the mansion. Behind the boy stood the tall shadow figure. But the boy's face, it was his own, Daniel's. And at the bottom of the drawing were 4 words. "He always comes back." Suddenly bang. The basement door upstairs slammed shut. Daniel scrambled back up the stairs and threw his weight against it. It wouldn't budge. Hey. Hello. He pushed harder, locked solid. Then the breathing sound returned. This time, it was right behind him. Daniel turned, slowly. In the far corner of the basement, something moved in the darkness. It was tall, too tall to be human. His flashlight flickered, and, for a split second, Daniel saw it clearly. A black silhouette stretching almost to the ceiling. Its arms hanging at an unnatural length. Where its face should have been, there was only void. The creature tilted its head. Tenet spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers. You opened the house again. Daniel's body went numb. What are you? He managed to whisper. The shadow glided closer. You forgot, but we didn't. Daniel backed away until he hit the cold, damp wall. What do you want from me? The shadow stopped, and it whispered something that turned his blood to ice. You were the one who locked us behind the last door. Lightning flashed through a high basement window, and in that instant, the shadow was gone. Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran back up the stairs and slammed his shoulder into the door. This time, it burst open. He stumbled into the hallway, panting, sweating, terrified. But something was wrong, very wrong. The hallway wasn't the same. The walls looked older, more decayed. The air was colder, and the staircase was gone. In its place was just a long corridor leading upstairs. And at the end of that corridor, the last door stood wide open. Inside the darkness of that room, someone was standing there, watching him. And it looked exactly like Daniel. Daniel stood in the hallway, unable to move. At the far end, the last door was fully open now. And inside the darkness, someone was standing there, perfectly still. Watching him, the lightning outside flashed through the broken windows for a brief second. And in that flash, Daniel saw the figure clearly. It was him. Same face. Same clothes. Same scar above the eyebrow. The figure slowly stepped forward into the dim light. Daniel's mouth went dry. That's not possible. The other Daniel tilted his head slightly. Then it smiled, but something about that smile was deeply wrong. Too wide. Too unnatural. Like someone who had learned how to smile by watching humans, but never quite understood it. The figure spoke. Its voice sounded almost identical to Daniel's, but colder. Hello. You took a long time to come back. Daniel shook his head slowly. No. This can't be real. The other Daniel took another step closer. You said the same thing last time. A cold wave ran through Daniel's body. Last time, the figure pointed behind him. Look. Daniel turned around. The hallway walls had changed again. Dusty paintings now covered them. Portrait after portrait. Each one showed a different person. Different years. Different clothes. But every single portrait had one thing in common. Standing behind the person in each painting was the same tall shadow creature from the basement drawings. Watching. Waiting. Daniel moved closer to the paintings. His hands trembled. Then he saw something that made his heart nearly stop. The final painting. The newest one. It showed him standing in the hallway. Exactly like this moment. And behind him, the shadow creature was reaching out, almost touching his shoulder. Daniel spun around quickly. Nothing there. But the other Daniel was still standing by the last door, watching him carefully. You still don't remember, the figure said quietly. Daniel clenched his fists. Remember what? The other Daniel walked slowly toward him. With every step, the temperature in the hallway dropped. You grew up here. Daniel's breathing stopped. No. Yes. You're lying. You lived in this house when you were 8 years old. Daniel shook his head violently. That's impossible. I grew up in Chicago. The other... Daniel sighed softly. That's the story they gave you. Daniel felt dizzy. Memories began flickering in his mind. Very faint. Very distant. A long hallway, a locked door, whispers in the night. He pressed his hands against his head. "What did you do to me?" The other Daniel stopped just a few steps away. "I didn't do anything." "You did. You opened the last door." Daniel froze. The words echoed in his head. "You opened the last door." Suddenly another memory flashed. A small boy. A dark hallway. A locked door with strange symbols carved into it. And the boy whispering to himself, "I just want to see what's inside." Daniel staggered backward. That wasn't me. But deep inside, he knew it was. The other Daniel continued speaking. "When you opened the door, you let them out." Daniel looked toward the last door. The darkness inside seemed to move slightly, like something was breathing in there. "How many?" Daniel asked quietly. The other Daniel answered immediately. "Many. Too many." Suddenly, thump. Something heavy hit the floor upstairs. Then another sound. Thump. And another. Footsteps. But far too heavy to belong to a person. Daniel slowly looked up at the ceiling. The footsteps were moving across the third floor now. Walking. Searching. The other Daniel whispered, "They know you're back." Daniel felt panic rising. "What do they want?" The other Daniel's expression changed. The strange smile returned. "They want to go home." Home. The figure pointed directly at Daniel's chest. "You're the door." The hallway lights flickered violently, and suddenly Daniel heard whispers everywhere. From the walls. From the ceiling. From inside his own mind. "Open the door! Open the door! Open the door!" Daniel fell to his knees. "Stop!" The whispers grew louder, and suddenly, everything went silent. Dead silent. The other Daniel leaned closer and whispered something that made Daniel's blood freeze. "You thought locking the door would stop us." Daniel looked up slowly. "What do you mean, locking?" The figure pointed at the last door again. "You locked us inside this house." Daniel felt his heart pounding. "You mean I stopped you?" The other Daniel nodded slowly. For a while, Daniel stood up slowly. Fear mixed with confusion. "If I locked you in, then why are you here now?" The figure's smile widened, because behind Daniel, something had quietly opened again. The basement door, and from the darkness below, long black fingers slowly reached out onto the floor. The whispers returned, louder now. Hungrier. "The door is open again." Daniel turned around slowly. And for the first time, he saw dozens of shadow figures climbing out of the basement, stretching across the walls like living darkness, their hollow faces turning toward him, watching, waiting. And the other Daniel whispered calmly, "You shouldn't have come back." The basement door stood wide open. Darkness poured out of it like smoke. Daniel slowly stepped backward as the shadow figures crawled across the floor and walls. They moved unnaturally. Their limbs stretched too far. Their shapes twisted and shifted as if they weren't meant to exist in the physical world. The hallway temperature dropped sharply. Daniel's breath turned visible in the freezing air. The whispers grew louder. Not one voice. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all speaking at once. "You came back. You opened the door again. Now you must finish it." Daniel's heart raced as he looked around. The shadows were everywhere now, crawling across the walls, sliding along the ceiling, watching him, waiting. But strangely, none of them attacked. They simply surrounded him. The other Daniel stood calmly beside the last door, almost like he had been expecting this moment. Daniel stared at him. "You said I locked you inside this house." "Yes." "Then why aren't you trapped like the others?" The other Daniel slowly walked closer. His expression suddenly changed. Less mocking, more serious. "Because I'm not one of them." Daniel frowned. "Then what are you?" The figure stopped only inches away. I'm what's left of you. Daniel's stomach dropped. What does that mean? The figure raised his hand and pointed toward the last door. You opened it when you were 8. The whispers grew quieter, as if listening. You didn't just open a door. You opened a gateway. Daniel's mind spun. To where? The figure's eyes darkened. To a place where things exist that were never meant to be in our world. Lightning flashed outside. For a brief second, the entire hallway lit up, and in that light, Daniel saw something horrifying. The shadow creatures had no true shapes. Their bodies were constantly changing, stretching, melting, reforming, like nightmares, trying to become real. The other Daniel continued speaking. When they started coming through, he panicked. Daniel felt another memory pushing its way into his mind. A terrified child, a screaming house, dark shapes crawling from a doorway. Yes, the figure said quietly. You remembered. Daniel's voice shook. I locked the door. Yes, but you didn't just lock it. The figure stepped closer. You sealed it. How? The figure tapped Daniel's chest. With yourself. Daniel froze. What? You became the lock. The hallway lights flickered violently. The whispers returned. The lock has returned. Daniel stepped backward slowly. That's impossible. You were too young to understand what you did. You trapped them in this house. But the seal required one thing. Daniel felt dread building in his chest. What thing? The other Daniel answered softly. You had to forget. Daniel's head spun. All your memories of this place were erased. You were taken away. You grew up somewhere else. But the seal was never permanent. Daniel looked at the shadows surrounding them. So that's why they're waking up again. The figure nodded. They've been waiting for you to come back. Daniel looked toward the last door. The darkness inside moved slowly, like a massive living thing, breathing deep inside the room. What happens if I open it again? The figure's face went pale. Then the gateway opens completely, and nothing will stop them. Daniel turned toward the creatures in the hallway. There were dozens now, maybe hundreds, watching, waiting. The whispers grew desperate, hungry. Open the door. Set us free. Let us into your world. Daniel closed his eyes, thinking, if he was the lock, then there was only one way to seal it again. He looked at the other Daniel. You stayed here all these years. The figure nodded. I'm the part of you that remembers. And now, the figure gave a small, sad smile. Now you choose. Daniel looked toward the last door, one final time. The whispers screamed. Now. Open eye. Open eye. Open eye. Daniel took a deep breath. Then he stepped forward. The shadow creatures became frantic. Their bodies stretched and twisted across the hallway, reaching for him. But they stopped at an invisible line around the door. They couldn't cross it. Daniel stood directly in front of the last door. The darkness inside seemed endless, a bottomless void. The other Daniel stood behind him quietly. What are you going to do? He asked. Daniel slowly placed his hand on the door. Cold energy surged through his body. Memories flooded back. The boy he used to be. The moment he opened the door. The moment the shadows entered the world. Daniel looked back once. At least this time. I remember. The other Daniel nodded. Goodbye. Daniel pushed the door closed. The moment it shut, a deafening scream exploded through the mansion. Every shadow creature began dissolving, their bodies tearing apart like smoke in a hurricane. The house itself started shaking violently, walls cracking, ceilings collapsing. The whispers turned into furious screams. New. Daniel pressed his hand against the door, and the seal began forming again. Dark symbols appeared across the wood, burning with cold blue light. The gateway was closing, but Daniel could feel his body growing weaker. The other Daniel watched, silently. You know what happens now. Daniel nodded slowly. I stay. Yes. You become the lock again. Daniel took one final breath, then no one else gets hurt. The last symbol burned into the door, and everything went silent. The shadow creatures were gone. The whispers vanished. The mansion stopped shaking. The gateway was sealed. Forever. Or at least, until someone opened the last door again. Years later, a group of explorers stood outside the ruins of Blackwood House. The building had collapsed long ago. Only fragments remained. One of the explorers noticed something buried in the debris. A single wooden door. Perfectly intact, standing upright between broken walls. The man brushed the dust off it. Strange symbols covered the surface, and written across the center were 5 words. Do not open this door. The explorer laughed, probably some old legend. He reached for the handle, and slowly he began to turn it.